Well, continuing on in this series of getting this F-250 running better, I'm going to go ahead and replace the ignition switch in here. And I had a bit of an issue the other day. I was coming off the interstate on the way to work, and I saw some smoke coming right around this gap here between the steering column and the instrument cluster, rising up about as much smoke as you'd find from a tip of a cigarette for about maybe 10 seconds or so, and it had that classic electrical smell, kind of like the older Bakelite connectors, electrical connectors, when they get really hot. So I think I mentioned before in the video, or the first video, that the owner already told me there was a problem with this ignition switch, and I'll demonstrate what that problem is now. I'll just unlock the steering wheel and put it in gear so the engine doesn't start. And the problem is once you go to full ignition and you go to try to start it, it stays in the starting position. So I know the ignition switch has to be replaced just because of that alone, if nothing else. Go ahead and put it back in park and turn it off. And one of the other things I noticed, which is pretty hard not to notice, is on the way home from work, about maybe 10 minutes after I had the engine running, it basically just stopped. And no warning lights were on when that happened. In other words, if the engine just were to stop, you should be back into this condition right here, where you have at least the battery indicator and check engine light illuminated. None of that occurred. It's as if somebody just turned it off. So that tells me that there may be a couple of things going on here. I already know there's a problem with interference in this ignition switch, which is actually located down in there, probably due to high wear. And the engine shutting off, it's almost as if the switch has bad contacts inside. And those bad contacts may be allowing enough heat to be generated to cause the smoke that was coming up. So I think all of these may be related, but I won't know until I get this thing apart. So what I'm going to have to do is remove this lower cover, and the ignition switch is actually right here. It's fairly easy to replace, actually. I'm going to go in there with this new ignition switch, and once I get this apart and everything, I'm going to see what's going on in here and hopefully solve all three problems. I'm hoping that the smoke coming out of here is related to the ignition switch, but it may not be. I'm fairly confident at least the engine stalling and also the key getting stuck in the start position is related to the ignition switch. So we will solve some problems today, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to solve the smoke problem. I just have to figure out where that's coming from. So let me get started taking that cover off, and I'll be back. Okay, now that I've got the lower cowl trim removed, one of the first things I immediately noticed is some of the wire coverings all chewed up, indicating somebody's been in here before. And also looking at the tilt steering control lever, somebody's had this lever is actually scratched and bent up pretty bad. Somebody's had the steering column cover taken off too. So I think I'm getting closer and closer to some problems that are under here. This right here is actually the ignition switch, and what you do to get this off is there's a bolt here that you loosen up just with a regular 7mm socket wrench, and as you loosen that bolt, it's going to just move that connector right on out, which is really a good design, because otherwise, because of the heavy gauge wiring in here and the tight clearances, this plug would be really hard to get off. So let me go ahead and start pulling that out, and I'll be back. Just wanted to show you guys a little bit of the removal process. Hopefully you can see that plug moving out as I unloosen the center bolt. It's just walking right off the connectors. That might be enough to get it. Yeah. So one of the things I want to look out for, since I suspect there might be high resistance in the contacts in this switch, is I want to inspect for any kind of burn marks on this connector. And there doesn't really appear to be. So I may indeed have two problems going on. I'm glad my connector is in good shape though. So I'll set that aside. And then I also want to check on the ignition switch itself. If I can get this junk out of the way. And I don't see any evidence of anything getting hot under there either. But we know the switch has to be replaced anyway, so it's got to come on out. We can get a better look at it. And it's held in there by these two Torx bits. And I've already loosened them up. So we'll go ahead and take them out. Kind of hard to do with one hand. And it's just that easy to get these switches out of here. Let me get out here in the light. So electrically this switch looks fine. So I've got two problems going on now. And that is the original ignition switch, which kind of makes sense because it is worn. So whoever was in that steering column before didn't replace the switch. Most people think that the ignition switch is actually right here in the steering column. That's not true. That's just a lock cylinder that locks the steering wheel and the gear shift. There's an actuator rod in the center of that column that moves the slider back and forth to select, accessory, off, lock, and then run and start. So let me go ahead and get that new ignition switch out and try to put that in. See how the key works after that. Okay, I got the new ignition switch in. It's all tightened down, and before I hook the connector up to it, I want to go ahead and give it a test and see if that cured the problem. So we'll go ahead and try to go to the start position and see what happens here. So that did not cure the problem. That's acting just like it did before. Key actually comes out a little bit better, but because there's more of a positive feel for the different positions, but whatever problem I've got, it's now located in the steering column somewhere, probably the actuator rod botting up, and that probably is getting me closer to why they had that steering column taken apart in the first place. So that's just the way it goes in troubleshooting. You try to logically figure out what the problems are and take your best guess at it, your best educated guess, and replace the part that you think has failed. And sometimes that doesn't always turn out to be the case. Sometimes it'll throw you for a loop, and you got to keep digging. So I might just go ahead and put this older switch back in the original switch back in and see if I could take that switch apart. I mean, take that switch back and get my money back. The worst that will happen is I'll have a spare, which is not a bad thing, but hopefully I can get the money back. But now it's time to put the old switch back in and take the steering column cover apart and see what's going on in there. Okay, I've got the old ignition switch, the original ignition switch, put back in, and the connector screwed down. And installation really is reversive removal. As you tighten this bolt down, it actually puts the plug back on evenly and securely. I've got the lower cover of the column taken off, and it's just really a shame to see stuff like this. Look how bent this tilt steering wheel lever is. So this is definitely not a good repair I'm getting into. This is looks like somebody was using some channel locks or something like that to get that off instead of a regular crescent wrench. I really hate to see stuff like that, so I'm just wondering what I'm going to find inside this column now. With after seeing stuff like that, I'll probably just go to a junkyard and find a new component. The lower cover is easy to get off, but the top cover is constrained by the ignition switch, the ignition lock cylinder, and that's actually not too difficult to overcome. The way these lock cylinders work, I'm not gonna, I hope I can get under here, is there's a pin in there that you could just simply push upward and the lock cylinder will slide out. But the catch is you gotta have the key, because they don't want the truck to get stolen, of course. And I can already tell why my key buzzer doesn't work, and that's because the sensor for it is sitting out here where it doesn't belong. Whoever owned this truck really has a thing against buzzers. That should be around the entry to the hole there. And I've got the original chime that came with the truck sitting over there that I was going to put in. Once I got this lower cowl off, kind of killed two birds with one stone. It just sort of mounts up in here like this with that connector. The only reason I can think of that somebody would have gone through that much trouble to take this thing out is they probably didn't enjoy wearing a seatbelt. It's just amazing the lengths people will go to do stupid stuff. I'm going to go ahead and put that buzzer back in and restore that connection there. Get this thing back to original. But before I do that, I want to make sure it doesn't catch fire and burn up. So I got to solve the problem I originally came in to solve. So what you do is you turn the key to the off position, but not the run position. So now the steering wheel is unlocked. And we'll come back down here and we'll see if we can push this pin in. Just like that. And we should be able to come right on out with it. Takes two hands, but that's because I got the steering shroud in the way. Let me, I have to have the column tilted all the way down in order to clear the instrument panel when I take the top cover off. So let me move that back up. There we go. So there's your ignition lock cylinder. And you can see the grounding on here and this little contact that goes in and out like that when you put the key in for your door chime or your key alarm. So we'll just set that aside. It was getting all hung up, the steering column shroud. So now to get this off, to clear the instrument cluster, we'll go ahead and tilt it down. And I'm also going to have to probably get the gear selector in that position there so I can move this thing on up. But it's going to take two hands, so I'll have to turn the camera off, but I'll come right back with this thing removed and we'll see what we got going on in there. Okay, I'm a little bit deeper into this now, trying to do a couple of things at the same time. And one thing I notice is that the actuator rod in this thing is plastic, as you can see through here. So you can see as I put the lock cylinder back in so I can test. As I turn it, you can see what happens. It's just plastic riding in this channel here. So I think what I might be able to do, I don't want to disassemble this entire modular steering column. That'd be a major job. I think I might be able to just use some spray grease and spray some grease in these access holes right here and just kind of work this thing back and forth. See if I can smooth this out and keep it from binding up. And that's one thing. The other thing, I need to say, this is a Ford modular column. These columns, these steering columns were used on basically all the Ford products, at least all the big Fords like the pickup trucks and the Crown Vics, Marquis and town cars, things like that. Basically all the same steering column. And one of the common problems is the gear selector gets real loose. And you can see what's happening here. It's got a lot of clearance in that bearing as I move it up and down. There ought to be some kind of a bushing in there. And in actuality, there is. You can sort of see that bushing fell out. It's right there. I think all I gotta do is move that back up in there. I may have to take out the instrument cluster bezel to loosen up, to gain access to these bolts here and move it up to get the bearing cap off to move it back up into position. But that's definitely one thing I want to fix, because that just definitely doesn't feel right, doesn't feel good. And getting back to our electrical problem, I already figured out that the ignition switch was not the cause, and in a like manner, I pulled out the multifunction switch, basically your turn signal switch. That's just held in with 2 screws. And looking at the connectors back here, it's in very good shape. Doesn't smell burned, doesn't look burned. And the same thing for the multiple connector here. They both look in very good condition. No signs of anything getting hot. Wires look okay. And then the overdrive selector switch, that connector, that's in good shape too. So whatever problem that I had that was causing smoke to come out of here, maybe something deeper down into the steering column. There's a solenoid in here that prevents you from, it's called a brake shift interlock. Unless you have your foot on the brake, you cannot shift out of gear. That's got constant power all the time when the engine's running. It's way down deep in there. I gotta take a look at that. That's one last thing on this steering column that's electrical. Of course you got the horn circuit, but that's looking good too. There's no airbag on this car. And if I can't figure out if there's nothing in there that's causing a problem, the only other thing I need to do is get behind here and get this instrument cluster out and see if I can track down the problem. You can begin to see how frustrating it might be to solve electrical problems like this, because it's intermittent. I was able to get the car home. It only smoked for about 10 seconds. So it just involves a lot of methodical troubleshooting and taking stuff apart one at a time until we find out what the problem is. But I'm going to put all this stuff back together and check out the brake shift interlock solenoid, fix this bushing in here, and I'm not going to be able to put the key warning sensor back because it looks like it was cracked up here. If you try to put it in, it just pops right back out. So that's going to be something else I have to add to the junkyard list. So let me carry on with this job and see if I can find out what my problem was, and see if I can cure the binding lock cylinder. Well guys, I've had some success and some not so much success. The ignition lock cylinder is still exhibiting the same behavior even after being lubricated in 2 different points. So you go to turn it on. By the way, I got the door chime put in now, and it wants to stay in the starting position. And it ended up not being a lubrication problem. There's a gear inside of here, and then this plastic actuator rod is kind of like a rack, kind of like an rack and pinion steering system on a car. And what I think happened was, for some reason, it might have skipped 1 or 2 teeth. So this rack is probably a little bit farther back than it needs to be, making it so the ignition lock cylinder has to go to extreme points of its travel in order to actuate all the various functions. Like, for example, accessory hardly moves at all. That's all you get. And then to go to start the vehicle, you got to go all the way over here, and there's actually a detent inside this lock cylinder that makes it lock like that. So I don't think that they make any service parts for these steering columns, these modular columns. I'm certainly going to check. If not, I may have to just go ahead and get a new steering column, or see if I can find one a little bit cheaper in a junkyard. It's not a major problem. The car, it doesn't really affect the drivability of the truck or anything. It's just a minor annoyance. But this is one of these situations where you do the best you can. You try to lubricate everything. I removed the lock cylinder itself and lubricated that really good. And I also tried a new ignition switch, and it turns out the ignition switch wasn't the problem either electrically or mechanically. But I was able to take that ignition switch back and get my $25 back, which is good, and put the old switch back in there because that wasn't the problem. The problem is a little bit bigger in scope than that. And when things like that happen, at least you know what the problem is, and now you have to figure out, is it worth going ahead and putting a new column in here? Is the problem really bad enough or irritating enough to warrant a new column? And I may go ahead and do that sometime down the road, but I want to get a little bit more confidence with this vehicle, a little bit more driving with this vehicle before putting any large sums of money into it. One of the other problems with these modular columns is the gear selector lever bushing. You can see the amount of play in this. It's just all eaten up, and this bushing is just basically destroyed. I could push this bushing back up in there, but it's just going to work its way back out again. It's just completely gone. So there's it's got a slit in there, and that's on purpose. So I think I might be able to, hopefully I can get a new bushing for this and stick it in there. That would be the ideal thing. But then again, just like the ignition switch, it's a minor annoyance. That doesn't affect the drivability of the car. It's just got a lot of play in it, which is annoying. But the truck is 17 years old, and it's going to be a work truck, so it doesn't have to perform like a new car. But if I can spend 50 cents and get a new bushing to put in there, then I definitely will. And if I can get a new steering column assembly for not that much money, then I'll go ahead and swap that out. So I now know exactly what some of those problems are, and hasn't cost me anything but a little bit of time. And then the main thing I was worried about is why I saw some smoke coming out of here, which was either coming from the steering column or the instrument cluster. And I methodically took everything apart, removed the multi-function switch, examined the multiple connectors that go back here, as well as the overdrive cancel switch and the horn contact assembly and everything else, and didn't see any problems there. So the next logical choice was the instrument cluster. So I went ahead and pulled that out, and looking at these connectors, they look very good. No evidence of any heat stress there. Melted connectors are definitely a bad thing, and these look excellent. So since I had the cluster out, I actually found out that the problem is in the cluster. So I've got the cluster assembly disassembled right here. Once you get it out of the vehicle and you pop the glass off, these gauges just basically slip in and out of these contacts here. So the problem actually ended up being in the speedometer module. Get it up here in the light, and if you guys can see, we got a burned out trace right by that, it's either a capacitor or a surge suppressor, that black capacitor I'm focusing on, but there's the break in the trace right there. You can see how discolored that trace is because it burned off the coating. The coating looks kind of like copper on the rest of the connectors. And you come over here and you can definitely see that the trace kind of acted like a fuse and burned up. There's a small surface mount capacitor there, and then looks like a resistor there. So I don't know exactly why that happened, but that's the problem. That's exactly the source of the smoke. The speedometer assembly actually works very well. Still registers speed, and I believe the odometer still counts up, so all the functionality is still there. I don't know if I can get a replacement circuit board. This vehicle has a digital odometer, so that might be a little tricky getting that replaced, and getting the mileage programmed into the EEPROM there. I'm not sure what the procedure is for that. Definitely going to be a dealer item, and will be pretty expensive, I'm sure. But just like with the gear selector lever and the ignition switch, even though there's a burned trace on this board for the speedometer, the functionality is still there. So I've got a choice. I could either go ahead and spend some money to get a new speedometer and put that in, or I can kind of drive it like that and make it last as long as it can last. And I think I'll go ahead and do that. Just drive it till it doesn't work anymore, and it may never burn up again. It may never cause any issues, but I feel pretty safe now knowing exactly what the source of the smoke was and the smell. And this circuit board, if any more components on here fail, it's not likely to cause a vehicle fire. It's just like something burning up in your home stereo. It would smell pretty bad, make lots of smoke, but it's not going to burn the house down. So I feel pretty comfortable that I can go ahead and drive a car like this and not have any concerns of fire. And that was the main thing. If you start getting into some of the higher current systems on some of these wires where you're pulling a lot of amps, that's a different story. That'll definitely get the party started pretty quick, and you could have a vehicle fire. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and basically put everything back together, get the truck drivable again, and that way I can go ahead and start working on some of the other maintenance items of the truck, such as the transmission fluid and things like that. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. It's you know, I try to make my videos as real as possible, and not everything works out like I planned. You start taking stuff apart, trying to investigate what's going on, and sometimes the problem is not what you think it is. I was cocksure that that ignition switch, because of the combination of symptoms, was the actual problem. Because of the way the ignition switch acted and the fact that the vehicle shut off on me. Now that may well be because of what we have up here. I don't know whether the this particular board with the odometer has an interface into the powertrain control module, the PCM. It very well may. So that might make getting a speedometer replacement all the more urgent. But it does run pretty good. But you know, you give it your best guess, which was the ignition switch in this case, and you try that, and that doesn't work. So you keep on digging, and farther you dig, you might end up actually finding out what the problem is. So anyway, let me get this thing put back together, and next video will more than likely be the transmission fluid change. Well guys, looks like I can't leave well enough alone, it seems. I finished up the video just a second ago, but spent some time looking at this thing even more, and trying to show you. This black thing, I think, is the culprit. It's actually says what it is on the board right there, a metal oxide varistor. And you can tell that thing, it's got a big crack in it right there. And also looking at the leads coming out of it, they've gotten very hot. So I might, down the road, go ahead and attempt to repair this thing if that's the only component that failed on here and shorted out. And since this speedometer basically works perfectly, I might just go ahead and try to replace that and see what kind of life I can get out of it, instead of having to buy a brand new module and spend lots of money on that. So just wanted to share that with you guys. I doubt that a regular automotive shop would have found the root cause like that, but I think that this one little varistor right here was the cause of all the trouble, all the smoke and everything being generated, and having to take everything apart. So I'm going to go ahead and put it all back together so I can drive it around and everything, and then I might go ahead and revisit this later on down the road. Might be a good wintertime project to try to replace that thing and restore the speedometer just like I'm restoring everything else.